Welcome to another episode of Century Craftsman Kitchen Renovation. Century refers to the age of the home. It's nearly 100 years old. Craftsman refers to the style that was dominant when the house was built, and also the style that I'll be referencing when making a lot of my design decisions for the kitchen renovation. We've been talking about Craftsman a lot, and I thought I'd do an episode today just on Craftsman. So this will be a 101 for those of you who aren't familiar with Craftsman style, and it'll be a kind of a tour uh, through my experiences with Craftsman for those of you who are familiar with the style. I first learned about Craftsman through the arts and crafts movement, which I learned about through jewelry. So it's a little bit of a long story. In the 1990s, there was a collaboration between Michaela Fry, a jewelry maker from Vienna, and the Victoria and Albert Museum in London. They wanted to do a number of pieces that were inspired by William Morris. William Morris was the main thought leader for the arts and crafts movement. I knew Michaela Fry from some pieces my grandmother had brought back from a trip to Europe when I was a teenager. What was really intriguing to me about this enamel jewelry was how colorful and kind of lighthearted it was. It wasn't just silver or gold, it didn't have gems in it. So it was metal with enamel on it, and the enamels had fun pictures like balloons, ribbons, rainbows, and they were in pastel colors. So it's not what I had seen before in jewelry. And so that kind of caught my attention, and I kept track of Michaela Fry. And in the 1990s, mid 90s, I was a graduate student and I was going to Europe, and I would have the opportunity to go look for her work and possibly to buy it. And on one of the trips to, it was either Germany or Switzerland, I ended up buying a William Morris bangle and a ring. So these were a lot of money, it felt like to me at the time. So it was a real splurge. And the print on these pieces is inspired by Strawberry Thief. And so that was how I got into William Morris. I was so intrigued by his prints. They were rich, colorful, detailed. And this led me to the arts and crafts movement. Fast forward, and my first house was in California, and it was in Craftsman style, so American Craftsman. I did a lot of research at the time on how to decorate the house because we're basically getting an empty white box. So we painted the house using Craftsman colors, and we bought some Tiffany pendant light shades. Fast forward again, and my second house here in Toronto was also a Craftsman, but a kind of Toronto Canadian Craftsman, not truly the California Craftsman. So I did more research on the style, kept the wood paneling that came with the house, and we started acquiring stickly furniture. With each renovation that I've done in the house, I've brought back some more Craftsman detail, but with a modern twist. The twist comes in how I combine elements, but also sometimes materials aren't available and don't make sense to use. So let me tell you about Craftsman. So the Craftsman style was big from about the 1890s to 1930s. So big relatively speaking. This is big relative to its rise and fall, but it was not as big as the dominant style at the time, which would have been like a Victorian or Georgian. It grew out of the global arts and crafts movement, and it was kind of a taking back of craft work and natural motifs. So craft work as in things you do with your hands, so handicraft or craftsmanship, and natural motifs like trees and leaves and birds, as opposed to the very technologically oriented or industrial themed Victorian motifs. There is an emphasis on wood, letting that beautiful material shine through. So the Craftsman style had impact on art and architecture. So how houses were constructed, and also the design elements in those houses, textiles and wallpaper, That was the arts and crafts influence through William Morris, leaded glass, and colors. So the Craftsman style later led to Art Deco. So think Great Gatsby or Chrysler Building in New York or Gustav Klimt's paintings from Austria. And mid-century modern, which is a style that I'm not very fond of, but you'll see that influence probably peeking out even in the things that we have around this house. So let's start with the arts and crafts movement. This movement emerged maybe in the first half of the 1800s. This was a movement that was a reaction to industrialization in the 18th century. So the 1700s was a time of really big change in the world. It's the time when we went through enlightenment into the modern era. And during this time, there was industrialization. So this movement was a rejection of factories and mechanization. What happened with industrialization is that there were factories built in towns, and that led people to leave the land or their farms and go into cities and become workers. As workers, they became dependent on owners for their livelihoods. So families that were situated on farms and tied to the land lost their autonomy as economic units. Their fortunes became tied to the factories and the people who owned the factories or who invested in factories. Prior to industrialization, processing of wool happened in small batches in small units in the countryside. So families would be raising sheep, they would be shearing the sheep, they would be spinning the wool and weaving that wool into cloth. And with industrialization, a lot of that hand skill or hand work or hand knowledge was lost. And this work was taken over by machines. I don't want to idealize life in the country in the 1700s in England, but there were certainly things that were lost with the move to cities. And the arts and crafts movement was trying to take back some of these. So this movement was advocating for social reform, not just a technological reform. They were promoting handicraft without division of labor or machinery. So the idea that a single person could take wood and turn it into a piece of finished furniture was something that they were trying to promote. They emphasized natural materials like wood and images. This movement wasn't just local to England, although it was very dominant there. It spread throughout Europe and it became the craftsman style in North America. And it was had an influence in Japan as well. So William Morris, his dates are 1834 to 1896, was the thought leader. He was a leader in terms of what he was writing, what he was saying, and also the products that he created. He designed and produced decorative goods, so things that you could put in your house and make it look nice. So textiles, so fabric for cushions or fabric for curtains, wallpaper, tapestries, stained glass, furniture, and so forth. William Morris was a person who spanned both industrialization and pre-industrialization. And so he spoke to both movements, both eras. So he was upper class and wealthy, but at the same time, he was advocating for workers. He lived both in the city and the country. When he was working, he designed by hand, but he owned a factory so he could mass produce his decorative products. One of William Morris's best known prints is Strawberry Thief. So it has leaves, it has birds, it's a repeating pattern, it's widely applicable. I've been talking a lot about craftsman style, and now it's time for me to show you some craftsman style. In these examples, I'm going to show you antiques when they're available. Modern reproductions or period replicas tend to be too typical. They tend to represent our memories of them or our impressions of them as opposed to how they were lived out at the time. It's the difference between clothing you would see on an haute couture runway versus what people actually wore, or what you would see in a movie set versus what people wear every day. So I want to capture the style as lived. This is a pretty good example. On the left here, we have an antique paint chart or color chart from Benjamin Moore. And so these would be both Victorian and Craftsman style colors. But what I want you to note is how they look compared to the Craftsman palette that's modern and created using currently available paints. In comparison, the older colors tend to be a little bit muddier. This represents both the fading of the sample that we have, but also the colors at the time were muddier because of the chemical processes that were available to make colors. And the modern colors tend to be a little bit sharper, a little bit crisper, and brighter. And so this is kind of what we like to see in our homes now. We have more windows, we have more lighting. And so this brightness, we want some brighter colors to go with this setting. So here's a typical Craftsman living room. You see wood, lots of it, uh, in a dark stain. This wood is used in the beams in the ceilings, in the trim around the fireplace, the trim around the door, and the wainscoting. Built-in furniture, that's typical of the era. So this bookcase here. And over here we have a picture window or a bay window. You can see that it bows out, so definitely the bay window there. They have leaded glass. On either side of the fireplace, you have a leaded glass window that has the pickets pattern in it. The chairs have wood and textiles. You can see the cushions on the two chairs on the left have arts and crafts style prints on them. The chair in the back right also has a kind of a natural motif, but with a Southwest influence. This bench in the front here has a cushion that's covered in leather. The fireplace is done in tile. At the time, it could be a tile or stone, but it looks like stone or it references kind of a natural impression. It ties in with the earth tone paint color on the wall as well. Another design element that's important in Craftsman is the use of stained glass or leaded glass. This is the Wisteria lamp by Louis Comfort Tiffany. His dates are 1848 to 1933. He is the son of, I believe his name is Charles Tiffany, who founded the famous jewelry store. Electrification of North America happened around this time, and this led to the use of light bulbs in lamps, and that made lights like this possible in contrast to what was used before, which could have been candles or gas or oil. What you can see here is that it's very detailed, intricate pieces that are pieced together. The colors are vibrant. It uses a motif from nature, which is the hanging wisteria, and the irregular edge from the on the bottom of the lampshade captures this. Here's another example of a William Morris wallpaper. This is called Acanthus. Again, image from nature, detailed patterns. So there's not just the acanthus leaves, there's also a pattern between the acanthus leaves, and it's large scale, meant to be used room sized. This is not something that was intended to be personal sized. So what's not Craftsman style? Sometimes it's easier to understand a style by looking at counter examples instead of just examples. So this is colonial revival. Colonial refers to the era, so the early days of the colonies into the early days of the nation of the United States or even Canada, but this is more typically American. The revival part refers to Greek revival. As you can see in this picture, the paint color is white or nearly white. There isn't the rich reference to earth tones that you would expect to see in Craftsman. This is an example of a Victorian living room. The colors are brighter. The chandelier, for example, is more ornate, harkens back to when it could have been lit using candles or gas or some kind of fuel. Take a look at how detailed the molding is at the top of the room. The room height is much taller, so it's a grander scale of architecture. The frame around the picture over the fireplace and the fireplace itself, all of the decorative things are very detailed, ornate, fancy, fussy, you would even say. in comparison to the simplicity of the Craftsman style. The carpet on the floor, that isn't a nature motif. So it tends to be more geometric. It tends to be more abstract. The cabinet along the wall, the shapes in the glass is Chinese influenced. Let's pull Craftsman style into the context of kitchens now. So let's start with some cabinetry examples. Here are 8 different styles of cabinetry. So each one of the 8, at the top, there's a drawer front, and at the bottom is a cabinet door. And the names on the different styles to me are pretty accurate. These are all similar, and they're similar not just because they look similar, but they're similar in that they emerge at around the same time chronologically, and they're inspired by very similar values. A simplicity, a respect for the wood, wanting to draw out the beauty of the wood, and craftsman techniques to execute. This one here, the pegged Craftsman single panel, to me is the most classically Craftsman. This one would have 2 styles down the side, and then on the drawer there's one across the front. In the cabinet there's 2 styles down the side, another piece across the top and the bottom, and a recessed panel between them. That to me is classically Craftsman. So what does a Craftsman inspired modern kitchen look like? So let me show you a few examples. This to me is a typical Craftsman kitchen. Dark stained wood, metal pulls in a fairly simple style. The drawer fronts and the cabinet doors look like furniture. They're rendered in a very refined way. The backsplash is a piece of art with nature motifs. It's a tree. And the countertop and the backsplash are rendered in a material that looks like stone. Here's a kitchen that is Craftsman inspired, but with a modern twist. There is dark wood stained to show the grain in the gate in the front and the island in the back. The lattice in the gate alludes to a Japanese style. There's an apron front sink in stainless steel that alludes to the farmhouse, but in modern materials. The cupboard doors and drawer fronts, those are in a shaker style, but white, so it brightens up the kitchen. The countertops are in marble, which is appropriate for the period, though I doubt that these countertops actually are marble. Here's another modern craftsman or even arts and crafts inspired kitchen. The backsplash is in tile with a strawberry thief pattern. The pulls on the cabinets are nature themed, so they look like deer antlers. Floor is a dark wood, which is typical. Some of the other elements, for example, the bridge over the sink, that shape was also in my kitchen before we demolished it. So that was a quick tour of Craftsman style, kind of a 101. I hit the highlights there, and I think I hit what I really like about Craftsman style. I think most of all, the arts and crafts movement, it was a social movement that was advocating for change. That appeals to me. And it's about politics, changing power dynamics versus, so for example, farm and rural versus city and industrial. Craft work, how you do work with your hands. So the original maker movement, architecture, how you build houses, how you make furniture, and finally art, really beautiful arts and crafts style prints by William Morris. So these things together, I think, form a cohesive worldview or a design view, and it makes it very easy to make design decisions, but it also appeals to me. I like design that is beautiful because it's simple. Antoine Saint-Exupéry, the author of The Little Prince, he was also an engineer, and he said, perfection is achieved not when there is nothing left to add, but when there is nothing left to take away. And so that kind of all of this together really speaks to me. So that's it for today's episode of Century Craftsman Kitchen Renovation. In our next episode, we'll talk about the finishes we chose.